So here we are with Emma.
It's one thing to be challenged by this man you respect who comes by your house regularly and is a good friend. But it's another thing entirely to be challenged by someone you're married to, right? To receive counsel and occasionally experience disagreement with that sort of person. That is something that she needs. I think she needs something that's in a deeper relationship than just even a close friendship.
Is that something novel? No pun intended. Hey, Chris.
Hey, John. Good to see you.
You too. So here we are with Emma, and this is a work you've done very recently in senior seminar with our seniors. I was wondering, how did the students take to this work? It's in so many ways it could feel like a foreign world to us. It's England in a very particular time, and it's a very different sort of society. It's Victorian England, largely concerns the workings of the female mind, the female world here, though obviously there are significant male characters. And I just wonder, how do the students respond?
Yeah, I think it is a challenge, at least for many of them, if they're expecting something of real magnitude to be happening in the story. Maybe they don't know going in what kinds of things Jane Austen's stories are about. If they're expecting a murder or something of some scale, right? Some more heroic virtues, you might be disappointed. It really is a study in a relatively small town, right? About the relationships among people, right? So if you're expecting something epic, you'll be disappointed. And if you only see human relationships and mild dramas as being something like soap operas, right, you'll be disappointed as well, right? But I think it's really more of a study of specifically an individual, the heroine, right, Emma, study of their soul and the moral choices they make in these sort of circumstances where not that much is at stake. The situations in which most of us find ourselves most of the time, right? And you see this is where virtues are produced, vices are produced, or at least that's where their effects are felt most strongly. It is nice insofar as it's a close look at one person, really, right? Because you're inside her head for the most of the book. I think there's one chapter in which she's absent. Every other chapter, she's the main character, and you get to hear her thoughts. It's not first person the way the story is told. It's still third person, but the narrator can tell you what she's thinking about. And of course, you also get to hear her private conversations with other characters, with certain individual characters, so you get to see her thoughts that way as well. And so, you might say psychologically and morally speaking, it's an opportunity to think about ourselves and how we interact with other people, and what's driving us, what's repelling us, what are our temptations. And so I think if you're attending to those things, it becomes a great opportunity to think about yourself and other people, right? And the circumstances you really are probably going to find yourself in, right? Even if you're not going to live in 19th century England.
That what you say about the focus on this primary individual and in a way being inside her head, seeing the world from her vantage point, is that something novel? No pun intended. But in the sequence of the readings we do here at TAC?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unique. I mean, the students will actually read Huckleberry Finn, our seniors, within a month of reading Emma, and they're similar in that respect. That you're inside Huck's mind the whole time. That is first person, so it's even more obviously you're seeing a person's
But this one comes first.
Yeah, that's right. I guess that's right. And it is unusual on the whole, I think. Most novels don't give you such monogamous relationship with one character, right? If it's an omniscient story where they read everybody's thoughts, you get to be privy to everyone's thoughts. But this is almost more like a Shakespeare play in which the main character is the one who does the soliloquies, right? Shakespeare tends to have the main character gets sometimes all of the soliloquies where you get to hear their private thoughts. This is like that, rather than bouncing around among minds, different perspectives. Some novels will have some characters it'll be told by this character in this chapter, and then the next chapter it'll be told by another character, or at least you'll be privy to their thoughts at different times. So this is an opportunity, especially I think for the men at the college, right? Maybe men, generally speaking, who don't tend to read these kinds of novels. It should be a good opportunity to think about how women sometimes see things, right? Because I find some of my students will at first find her frustrating, the heroine, and maybe so do ladies, I think. But the more of the novel you read, the more she endears herself to you, right? And maybe you see yourself in her. She makes frustrating choices, right? Now and again, right? But it's never deeply upsetting what she does, I find at least. And if anything, you start to admire her. She is kind of the smartest person in the room for most of the novel. And so you're drawn to her strengths as well.
Yeah, that's something that's striking to me, is how so like you're saying, on the one hand, we are seeing things from her vantage point. We're kind of inside her head. And yet at the same time, I guess because it's not in the first person, we're also able to see her in front of us. And that's a remarkable accomplishment here.
Thanks.
Is that we're kind of in this dual framework. But one of the things that strikes me from the outside about Emma is this kind of extraordinary capacity she has when it comes to interpersonal relations. That she seems to be able to encounter anyone, engage anybody with a real kind of confidence and intelligence.
And kindness, even.
And kindness that you don't find in probably many people in real life, or many of the characters in this novel. And that immediately makes her someone that you're just kind of naturally interested in. Okay, so what's this person going to do? Are there any failings here? Right? Because especially at the outset, you might think this is just kind of an awesome person. But then the downside could be, well, how are we going to fill 300 pages? Actually 400.
Right. She and the situations she's in are often comedic as well, and so not so much because she's doing anything buffoonish, but characters she interacts with do some things that are silly, and so you enjoy, I think, following her around and her exchanges with different characters, and at the same time, you're sort of wondering, where is this novel going? Right? Again, unless you received some sort of you read the back of the book, or you had someone tell you about this is a novel that is in a way a romance, although it's not really a romance in any strict sense. In a way it's a soap opera, but it's not really as trivial as a soap opera. In a way it's a comedy, right? But it's not just a barrel of laughs. Right? The less you know going into this, the more you just find you're just following this character and how she's interacting with people, and starting to wonder, well, is she missing something there? Is she being too hard on that person? She's being very kind to this other person. She's even got a kind of magnanimity towards her friend Harriet, who's a cut above her in terms of status, social status, or cut below her, excuse me. And Emma is trying to lift her up and even find a match for her. That's a kind of greatness of soul. It's a kind of kindness where she's trying to provide Harriet with something that, left to herself, Harriet would just never find, because she herself doesn't know who her parents were, and so there's some doubt about what rank she belongs in the social status. But Emma is drawn to help her, right?
One of the things that I think can be very foreign and perhaps even off-putting, maybe especially to the the male side of the world when it comes to this story and others like it is a certain prominence of the realm of manners and particular ways of doing things and acting and presenting oneself that even can become the subject of vigorous debate in the story and controversy.
Yeah. You have an example in mind?
Well, I'm thinking about, let's see, maybe the kind of question again surrounding Emma's relationship with Harriet as to whether this is an appropriate person to give the time of day to, right? So there's this Mr. Martin, who's a young man interested in Harriet, and Emma has very strong thoughts on Harriet's potential relationship with Mr. Martin. Now, I guess there's something universal there. It's probably always been the time that friends care about each other's relationships and have opinions on whom you might be interested in.
Who's
or not.
good for you.
Who's good for you. But there's something very determinate and deliberate about the way those things are approached in this world. Certainly in comparison to our own, which has a much more, in a certain way, relaxed and casual attitude and views relationships as in some way something that more happens to you. Well, if you like so and so, kind of pursue it, see what happens. Whereas here, there's this very intentional counsel that Emma's giving to her friend, for better or for worse. That that concerns ultimately maybe a more weighty sort of issue, which has to do with whom I might marry. But then there's also matters of just certain ways of speaking, or whether you should make the rounds and visit, just drop in on certain people, and it's not for any epic reason, right? There's nothing of great moment to discuss, but you call on so and so and spend an hour, maybe have a cup of tea, and that's it. And then you leave. And again, from certainly a more contemporary perspective, but maybe a different cultural perspective entirely, you could wonder, well, why do we need to read about these things? Why are they so important? Is this Jane Austen simply coming out of her own place and time and foisting all of these trappings on us? Or is there something that were important, that we're meant to take notice of in all of this?
I think that's right. I mean, I think there is something we're supposed to take notice of. And maybe in a way it goes back to something that we were talking about earlier about the kinds of virtues and vices that are at work here, that sorts of things that I think people sometimes just call social virtues, and like kindness and patience and wit and circumspection, affability. Those aren't the kinds of virtues that are at the front of people's minds when they're talking about virtue ethics or something like that. It's not like justice and prudence and courage, and especially when you're thinking about courage, it's courage on a battlefield when life and death are on the line. These are sort of the secondary virtues that nevertheless have to do with being a part of society, right? Having a community, right? Not society in a very broad, sweeping sense, but being a smart part of a local community, I guess you might say. And to see Emma working so carefully and so naturally. I mean, there's characters that she finds deeply frustrating, that she never says anything frustrating to in their presence, right? With a notable exception near the end of the novel, there's people that she complains about, but when she interacts with them, she's very affable, very civil, doesn't speak even in double-edged ways, right, with innuendo or something that's can be readily interpreted as an insult. She doesn't try to do that, whereas some other people maybe do. So she's trying to sort of interact with people in a way that doesn't lead to uncomfortable feelings or negative opinions even, right, of each other. She doesn't want to produce hatreds or animosities, even though they do seem to spring up among some characters. I'm thinking about Mr. Elton's chosen wife, right? They develop a kind of competition when Emma just can't bring herself to treat her as her equal. And Mrs. Elton really isn't her equal. She has got a kind of a vulgar side to her. She's kind of ostentatious about her wealth and bragging about things. And Emma's tries to be more moderate about those sorts of things.
What is this? When you say she's not her equal or she is her equal, what kind of thing are we thinking of there? Is it because that's another theme that seems to come up frequently in the novel, is this question about whether a person is of a kind of at the same level as me. And that's something that's, again,
hard to relate to.
It's hard to relate to.
If you're thinking about caste and that kind of thing. That's right.
And certainly as any kind of public discourse, I mean, it's surely present in our society. People are very aware of their status and who isn't at the same level. But how is Jane Austen wanting to present this kind of issue or asking us to think about it? That's
hard to say, because in some ways it seems to me, I realized I was being unclear earlier when I was speaking about people being Emma's equal. I was not thinking in terms of social status, but just sort of basic goodness and intelligence, native talents or something like that. But I do think it's right that in the novel, maybe more than anyone else, Emma thinks about social status and where people are. She to the point where she'll make complaints about someone's being lower class and other characters who are in her same social circle, even Knightley, for example, right, or tell her she's making too big of a deal out of that. Right? Emma will say to Harriet that Mr. Martin, who's interested in Harriet, is just in the kind of a no man's land between my rank and the rank that I could help. Right? She says, if he were a bit lower, I could be of use to him. Like she says something like that. Says, but he's kind of in this intermediate place that if I were to interact with him on a more equal level, it would be degrading to me. Right? And she'll use those images even till the end of the novel, when she's kind of had certain moral insights that make me think that it might be a blind spot. Maybe it's Jane Austen's blind spot, or maybe it's just Jane Austen wants us to see that this is something that Emma is still a weakness on Emma's part, that she thinks. So, for example, she says, Harriet, were you to marry Robert Martin, we really couldn't be friends anymore. We'd be passing acquaintances. And I think that would be a shame. And Harriet agrees, that would be a shame. And yet at the end of the novel, spoilers, they do get married. Harriet and Robert Martin do become married. And that's exactly what happens. Emma and she don't become enemies, but they sort of bid each other farewell. Like, you go to your social position, I'll remain in my social position. And I can't help but thinking, why couldn't they be friends still? Right?
Yeah, that's so. Knightley has a much higher opinion of Mr. Martin from early on.
Yeah, and interacts with him regularly. Yeah,
that's right.
It's off screen, if you will, off stage. But,
but he thinks he's got a certain kind of excellence to him. Yeah. Now, it's of a different sort than maybe Knightley himself or Emma. So I'm imagining that wouldn't be Knightley's thought necessarily at the end, right?
Yeah.
That we couldn't be friends anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think it is for Emma as a character? Does it have to do with wealth? Is it a question of wealth? Is it a question of intelligence? What are the factors that are going on in her judgment on those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, it's clearly partly wealth, but just the recognition that some bloodlines are of better stuff than others. It seems like that's just still in the British mind, right, in this period. And some people are lower class just by birth, right? Not setting aside what they're... It's not a moral judgment on them. It's just they're a slightly different kind of human being, right? And for Emma to interact and to step into the lower class there would somehow be blurring the social lines that we all should respect. That's sort of what it seems like she thinks. Right? It's contrary to the natural order or something like that. Yeah, but it's hard not to see her as a creature of her time, and Austen is writing at a time sort of just on the cusp where in England where people are going to start minimizing class differences, right? But it doesn't seem like Emma's anywhere near doing that, even though she is willing to elevate someone, to elevate Harriet to her level. She's not willing to drag herself down. She seems to think that's just vulgar. It's inappropriate. Right?
It's interesting that Knightley's character having the different take on that sort of thing is an honored character in the work. So as though Jane Austen is suggesting there is this other way to see things that while Emma is unresolved in this way, even at the end, that's not where perhaps she as an author is necessarily coming from.
I wonder if part of the reason it's more possible for Knightley to see things the way he does is because he's in a well-defined role as the owner of, is it Donwell Abbey? I can't remember, of a large estate. And it says he has a secondary role as a kind of magistrate in the town. You never actually see him performing the duties of a magistrate, as far as I can tell. But it's very clear that he and Robert Martin are not equals. So he can interact with Robert Martin on a more regular basis because the offices, if you will, the implicit offices are well-defined and agreed upon. Whereas if someone like Emma were to intermingle with a middle-class farmer, I guess you might say, like Robert Martin, her position is less well-defined. She doesn't have any political role in the city, in the town. Whereas Emma is able to. There's one scene where she goes to a home of a very poor family. You don't even get their names, as far as I recall. And she helps nurse a sick family, a sick mother and maybe a child or something like that. Provides them with food, I think. And that's someone who's poor enough that there'd be no confusion about Emma performing that act of charity, I think.
Do you think that, especially for young adults reading this work, that there's something important here for them to learn, which is that while these social distinctions aren't the end-all be-all, and one's character is uppermost, they still are important, or at least they're consequential. They make a difference within the world and within human relationships, and it would be foolish to simply try and ignore them altogether.
Which is our temptation.
And you might say it's a temptation that on Emma's part in a certain direction that Knightley has perhaps more of a clear view on, right? That, look, Harriet really can find a good match in this man here. And it might have something to do with kind of where they both are in the larger society, whereas Emma's trying in a kind of positive way to erase a certain kind of distinction. And maybe this is, I don't know, overly romantic in a certain sense on her part.
And maybe that's a good way of describing her, to romantic in the sense of imaginative or a kind of optimism, right? Because she says, okay, Harriet doesn't know who her parents are. Most people would think that's a bad sign, right? That there's some shame involved in her birth. And Emma insists upon giving it a rosier interpretation. She says that clearly means that her father's a lord, right? And that maybe there's some embarrassment in how Harriet was conceived. And so she's got the right blood, if you will, right, to be upper class. And she just cooks that up in her head. And Knightley says, you have no idea. And she says, well, you have no idea. That's sort of her response. And she does a lot of this sort of mixing her experience of people and her natural native cleverness with a lot of imagination, right? The thing that I was thinking about when you said romantic, imagining what could be and what couples should be formed. She takes credit in one of the opening scenes for having matched Mrs. Weston, her former, I want to say nanny, governess, with Mr. Weston, the fellow that she is marrying in the opening scene. And she says, I just sniffed it out. I saw it coming before anybody else. And she says, I'm going to do something like that for Harriet. And yet when she's picked Mr. Elton, right, the vicar, to be Harriet's future husband, she does not at all pay attention to their compatibility. She doesn't catch all the hints that Mr. Elton's much more interested in Emma than he is in Harriet. And when this comes out, Emma is really blindsided by it. When Elton tells you, no, I'm interested in you. Why would I want Harriet? She's not at my level. He even says that. She realizes, at least at that point, and it's not even halfway through the novel, right? She realizes that she's done so much imagining. It's sort of, she's put her own experiences through a filter such that she doesn't see everything the way it is. And that's a recurring trouble for her throughout the novel, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me of when Aristotle is talking about courage. One of the states of character that he says can resemble courage is one who is, puts it a couple different ways, kind of sanguine or optimistic, inexperienced.
Yeah.
A person might have a kind of fortunate occurrence in a battle. And on the basis of that, they think, oh, well, things are going to go well for me. And so I'm going to be confident in the next situation. And there's really not much there.
Yeah, it was dumb luck.
Yeah, there's a matter of chance. And so I wonder if something analogous to that is what's going on.
Yeah.
Emma presumably had, she rolled the dice well when it came to that first
Miss Weston
pairing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that she possesses the kind of insight into human beings that's really needed when it comes to making reliable judgments.
Yeah, I think you could say that. I think you could even say that she's very, like as you were mentioning earlier, she's very good at seeing what the proper and charitable way of interacting with people is, but she's not good at reading souls or reading minds, even her own, right? When she realizes that she's in love with Mr. Knightley towards the end, the reader's been privy to her thoughts for the whole novel, and at least I didn't see it coming. I think I saw it coming shortly before she did, but not early on in the novel.
Yeah.
Right? She really doesn't notice the way she's attached to him, right? And so I think that's a defect in her own attentive to her inner workings, right, of her heart, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of an amazing thing too on Jane Austen's part.
Yeah.
That we are with her. It's not as though there's some great surprise that we weren't aware of, some other dimension of their relationship in the background. It's all there.
Yeah.
And both she and us together discover something.
Yeah. I remember when I first read the novel when I was a student in college, I didn't see it coming at all. Knightley was my favorite character from the beginning because he would put her in her place and he would say clever and sharp but still charitable things to Emma, and I would cheer him on. But I thought of him as just a big brother, right? Or a friendly uncle. Until about halfway through the novel, there are certain anomalies in that interpretation of him that, like, where he seems to really get irritated by Frank Churchill.
Yes.
Around the middle of the novel, after Churchill has appeared, because you find out later it's because he realizes that people intended him for Emma or Emma for him, and so you slowly start to see that, or you see clues that you don't pick up on except with the benefit of hindsight that were indicating his attachment to Emma, but you see her sort of a need for someone like him before she sees it, and certainly before he sees it. You don't really see clearly that he's in love with her until he just tells you outright at the end.
Yeah. A couple things that I'm thinking about there. One is, when it comes to Emma and Frank Churchill, we're more disposed, or at least I was more disposed to see them as a likely match. And yeah, maybe something will come out about Frank that's problematic and it won't work out, but at least that seems to be more the stuff of which a relationship would be made. But does Emma, I guess, sort of flirts with that possibility, right? But isn't it true? It never becomes a serious option for her.
Well, she says early on she's never been in love, and she expects never to get married, and maybe never to be in love before she meets Frank. And even after she's interacted with Frank and had some really fun interactions, experiences, dancing and whatnot, and just conversing and laughing at a lot of the same things, she thinks, oh, is this what love is? Maybe I'm in love with him, huh? And then she sort of observes herself for a few days like, no, I'm not in love with him. And that's, I think, to her credit. That's because you do get the impression, oh, they're meant for each other early on. At least I got that impression that that's where the story was going. But there was things about him that sort of struck me as a sort of a screw off. You know, sort of doesn't take things seriously. He's always, remember he makes fun of Jane, who you later find out is his fiance, but not until the very end of the novel. He besmirches her name, her reputation, by implying that she had an affair or the beginnings of an affair, or at least that she was in love with a married man, and that she had tried to break it off. And Frank starts to tease her about it, playing with Emma. You don't find out that he's playing with Emma until the end of the novel, but you get the impression he's kind of a jerk to this Jane woman that he doesn't even know, right? He's implying that she had an affair that who knows how far it went, right? But there's things about him that you quickly learn as much as he's a good time Charlie and he's funny. He goes too far sometimes. And you can see even Emma recoils a little bit. Recoil maybe is too strong of a word. She's uncomfortable with it at certain points. And then she decides she's not in love with him. And you're like, oh, good for you. Because he's not what we want for you, the reader, I think.
Yeah, and you see there some of the force of a certain kind of charm. That even to some extent works on her, which is unusual in the novel, and that's part of why it has to do with her a kind of superiority that she has to most of the other characters. It's going to be rare that she finds someone in whatever way attractive enough to really move her. And Frank, you know, he's witty at a certain level. He's got a kind of personal charm. But then shifting back to Knightley, what do you think of there's kind of the age gap.
It's like 15 years or something like that.
Right.
It's substantial.
But I think part of what you're saying maybe helps me with that a bit, which is that, okay, why is it that she thinks she'll never be in love, never marry? Well, presumably because the sorts of men she has seen get married to her peers, or that she herself has interacted with on that kind of a basis, just don't present her with something substantive. Given the kind of person that she is, given the abilities she has. So maybe it would take someone who himself is exceptional in certain respects.
Unusual in their talents and their moral stature, I think. There's times where I think, and I think it's got to be intentional, but there's times where I think that one of the things that Austen's making you think about is the need for good parents. Right? It's remarkable if you notice how many characters are missing one or more of their parents. That is, so Emma's mother has died when she was very young, when Emma was very young. Frank Churchill's mother died, I think, when he was an infant. And Mr. Weston, who's Frank's father, sort of placed Frank with his wife's parents or family. And so he sort of checks out of Frank's life, which is kind of stunning when you think about it, right? But at any rate, so Frank grows up without his father, really, and his mother's passed away. Harriet, we never see her parents. And there was someone else that I'm drawing a blank on. At any rate.
And Emma's own father even.
He's vastly her inferior too, right? More than once, or maybe once or twice, it's mentioned that Emma's mother was much more like Emma, right? And if Emma's mother had raised Emma, you get the impression that maybe some of Emma's faults wouldn't be present. I mean, because Emma needs someone to challenge her. And it says that the governess, Miss Weston, was really more of a companion for Emma. Once Emma started to enter puberty or early teen years, she was already brighter than Miss Weston and stronger willed. And so they just became friends, basically. Having as a governess someone who is in many ways your equal means you're not going to acquire certain virtues that, not with the help of the governess at least, that you need. And so I wonder sometimes whether we're made to think about how unfortunate it is that Emma has no mother and a father who is he's more comic relief, and he's a sweet old man, right? But he's a hypochondriac who's constantly worrying about everyone being ill, doesn't want to leave the house. His biggest problem with Knightley and Emma marrying is that Emma's not going to be living with him anymore. He wants to be in his routine. And Knightley very happily accommodates that by moving in, promising to move in at the end of the novel. And that's even one of Emma's own motivations for not wanting to date, if you will, right? Not to seek marriage. And she says, well, I'm so happy with my father, and he needs me.
Yeah.
She's right. He does.
Right. Yeah. And so there's something noble there.
Yeah.
It's also something very comfortable.
Yeah, for her. Yeah.
And she's able to sort of step in and out of other people's lives as needed or as fits her personality.
Yeah, she's like a matriarch of the town. Well, she's like 21 years old, but she's like the old dowager of the villa, right? And that sort of makes her visits and takes care of everyone without ever being having the potential of marrying, right? Obviously, Mr. Elton, when he meets her, assumes that she is available, right, interested in marriage, but everyone else seems to treat her as sort of I don't want to say a non-sexual character, but at least a character who is an overseer of the community, not really a potential match. At least there's not much mention of that. People are excited when they see Frank Churchill's coming to town, and they think that Frank and she might become an item, and it even seems like they are an item at one point. But she doesn't see herself, at least, as being on the prowl, looking to find a man.
Yeah.
She's not even thinking, there's no one in this town that is my equal. Let's visit London and get to know people because I want to find a good man. She is sort of, things are good the way they are. She thinks that she's found her place in life. That's how she sort of sees things, I think. And it doesn't involve a man.
There's something maybe a little bit removed, almost abstracted in that way in Emma's experience and her engagement with real life.
Yeah.
And that might go hand in hand with what you were bringing up earlier, this very imaginative character
her
of
fancy.
Her fancies when it comes to real things, human relationships, and
Yeah.
how important those can play out.
Yeah.
What do you make of the fact that Knightley is also connected with her because his brother and Emma's sister are married?
Yeah.
And that's something, if I'm not mistaken, it comes up early on. But then you kind of, as a reader, almost forget about that relationship.
Yeah.
There are some scenes as the novel continues
visit,
that involve the in-laws there. But I guess that if you recall that, if you're attentive to that as a reader, then that makes Knightley's presence more continuous to Emma, already there. It's of a deeper nature than just some local guy who's a good man and
he's at
who's
the house.
helpful.
You get the impression almost every day he visits, he stops in.
Yeah.
It says she has the community of a marriage in a way already. It's not quite that, but
right. And yet she's blind to it in a certain way.
Yeah, that's right. And so she's blind to how much she appreciates his presence, in part because I think he challenges her regularly, right? The things he says, so that she sees him as sort of a mixed blessing, maybe in some ways. Right? Again, that's why I thought of him as a brother early on, an older brother who sort of calls out his younger sister when she's speaking nonsense or doing something foolish. But their relationship doesn't become amorous, at least not on her side. And we don't get to see inside his head, right? So we don't know exactly what thoughts are going through Knightley's head. So maybe to some extent, you don't know whether he himself discovers his affection for her as the novel goes forward. Or maybe it's just there from the beginning and he's waiting, biding his time till she seems interested in him. But in her case, at least, there's a great deal of I have a very healthy friendship with this man, right? That the idea of it becoming something deeper, something that taps into a different desire in her heart, somehow doesn't cross her mind. She's unusual for a woman in that respect. I mean, and for a man, for that matter, for a human being, right? To not feel like there's a hole in their heart when they haven't found a spouse, right? But once she becomes aware of it, it's as though the scales fall from her eyes, and her heart overflows with grief, because she thinks she's going to lose him originally when she first finds out that Harriet's convinced that Knightley's in love with her, Harriet. And Emma's first reactions to that are you might say classist, right? She's saying things like, she's so much lower than he is. And these are things she's saying to herself. And how could Harriet dare to aspire to someone like Knightley? And how could he sink himself so low? And at certain points, though, she starts to realize that these are false reasons for being upset, right? The real issue is that I'm in love with him.
Yeah. It is interesting to think about his... I guess I've tended to think that he himself becomes aware of this over the course of the novel.
Maybe that's right,
and it has to do with Frank Churchill.
Frank, yeah.
That seems like an important moment there.
So then it's a bit almost analogous to, I mean, in other words, Knightley hasn't made his move not because he's biding his time, but he hasn't felt a desire to change the situation. But Frank actually brings him self-knowledge as well. Maybe Frank brings Emma self-knowledge, but at any rate, I think you're right that he isn't fully aware of his attachment, the nature of his attachment to Emma,
right?
Until he sees that she's going to end up with him, right? And he's a buffoon, at least in Knightley's judgment.
Yeah. So marriage is something maybe that is typically done, that these other people do, but for me, Emma, and possibly for me, Knightley, not so much, because I do have a kind of superiority, just truthfully speaking, regarding those around me, but also I'm already in a structure of relationships that works, that's been very comfortable, that's good, is helpful to my father and so on, and so there isn't a need, kind of a need. But maybe Austen is suggesting that it's important for people to be challenged, and not just to continue in a kind of zone that's been set up for you. And I wonder if part of it on Emma's side is that, as you referenced earlier, she hasn't seen her parents' marriage. It isn't maybe a reality for her, in such a way as to exhibit what its challenge, but also its blessings could bring.
That's right. Although I do wonder if Emma's mother had survived. Emma's mother, I think, it still wouldn't be a marriage of equals unless the father's hypochondria is somehow an effect of Emma's mother's passing, or something that a late arrival. You get the impression that the brains would have been on Emma's mother's side,
right?
Mr. Woodhouse. is kind of a nut, I think, from the beginning, at least from what you see. But you're right. I mean, there is something that she has missed out on by seeing the dynamic. I mean, it's one thing to be challenged by this man you respect who comes by your house regularly and is a good friend. But it's another thing entirely to be challenged by someone you're married to, right? To receive counsel and occasionally experience disagreement with that sort of person. And that is something that she needs, I think. She needs something that's in a deeper relationship than just even a close friendship, I think. Marriage is something quite a bit more. Right?
Yeah, because you identify yourself with this person.
With the spouse, yeah. Right.
And that's something that she's really doesn't seem given to at the opening of the novel.
Right. Yeah.
She's aware of her merits and tries to use them for good.
Yep.
But again, I think back to Aristotle, where toward the end of the Ethics, he has that discussion of friendship, which in a certain way, it can be an excellence even beyond the other virtues, and it has to do with an identifying of another's good with your own.
Yeah.
And he even brings up the close analogy to something like a marriage.
Yeah. There's a point where when Knightley is professing his love to Emma, he admits that he has said things to Emma for her own good, but he's kind of said things a bit like a jerk. The way he said things where he says, "You've borne it the way no woman in England would have borne it." It's a little bit rude. And it's part of what I found kind of enjoyable to read, those criticisms he makes early on, verbal criticisms he makes, because they're kind of sharp and blunt, right? So he maybe has a thing or two to learn about how to interact with women, right? Especially your spouse. But she herself also grants that maybe it's just love speaking, but the affection of being in love. But she'll say several times, even to other people at the end, that he's my superior. He's a better person than I am. And so she intends, she's choosing him in a way, in part, because she thinks that she needs him as a person, right? She herself as a person, for her own growth. She wants his good, but she's just deeply drawn to him. He's a very good person, but she also sees him as a corrective to her own excesses that come from being permanently single, right, on her part.
That's really interesting, because that indicates something about the end of the novel. So she recognizes that superiority on his side. Presumably he sees in her the very lovable qualities that you as the reader are aware of from the outset.
Yeah, he calls her faultless for all her faults at one point, right? So she's got, in other words, her faults are small.
Yeah.
Finally. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and she certainly has a kind of a brilliance when it comes to her personal presence and ability to interact that surpasses him.
Yeah.
Right? He's a little more understated.
Yeah.
But in virtue of that asymmetry, you can see an interesting life for the two of them as things move forward. I mean, the novel ends where it does, but it's not as though you just have kind of two-dimensional characters. They just kind of find each other, and everything's just kind of perfect in some boring way, right? But that there's a mutual benefit that they can offer to each other in different capacities, so that there's a continued growth that might be possible.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you would see it if there were a sequel, God forbid. But if there were a sequel, it would be very funny to hear their conversations, because they're both very intelligent and such great wits. But there'd be real moral correction that would be done, I think, for the most part, in a really good way, a really kind way. And I'll say one last thing to Emma's credit. That critical scene near the end on Box Hill, when Emma makes fun of Miss Bates in front of everyone else, just with a single biting line, right? Makes fun of Miss Bates, very chatty, fairly vacuous personality. She says it in front of everyone in a situation in which Emma is a sort of holding court. She's sort of the person who's being looked up to in the whole group. She says it, thinks nothing of it, and the reader, I myself remember laughing out loud when she said it, because it was very funny, even though it was kind of cruel. But the conversation moves past that, and a few pages later, Knightley pulls her aside, and he says, that was cruel. That was a deeply cruel thing. You shamed her in front of everyone. And this is a woman who's very poor, who is bound to become poorer and poorer and sink lower and lower in our sort of informal caste system in this village. That she's the last person you should do that to, especially since you used to look up to her when you were a little girl, right? So he lays it on pretty thick, but says things that really cut to the heart. But here's the praise. It sounds like I'm beating up on Emma here. But the praise is, Emma knows it's true right away, and she feels horrible. And Knightley sort of leaves without a resolution, without her saying, you're right, I need to make amends. But he leaves, and she realizes the truth of it. She's crying the way home when she's in the cart, I guess. And the next day, she sets out to smooth things over with Miss Bates. And the amazing thing is you never see, Miss Bates seems to be, at least the later scenes, seems oblivious to it. You can tell when Emma first makes the harsh remark on Box Hill that Miss Bates feels it. It cuts her to the quick, and Knightley even says she won't stop talking about it. But she seems to be able to look past it. Miss Bates does, right? And not let Emma feel bad about it for very long. So Miss Bates is sort of a laughable character, but also a saintly character in this story. And Emma is sort of trying to heal her relationship with Miss Bates. You could almost, I think we could almost do a segment, a half-hour podcast just talking about Emma and Miss Bates, because there's so much about their interactions and Emma's relationship with her that's both illuminates Emma's virtues, but also her temptations, right? Because Miss Bates is deeply frustrating to read her.
Yes.
She'll go on for a full page without a paragraph break of saying, just nattering on. And so you understand Emma's frustration with this woman. But Emma feels bad. She repents right away. And it's sort of the only time she takes criticism in the novel where she, from someone else. She'll sometimes criticize herself, but takes it from someone else and tries to fix this part about herself. And that's, I think, a kind of heroic scene. Knightley never really, maybe he doesn't commit any crimes in this story, but you never see him faced with self-criticism at that level.
Yeah, and that seems to, it's really interesting what you're saying, because that seems to be in some way a kind of microcosm of the larger panoply of the kinds of issues that Jane Austen is asking us to think about.
Yeah.
Right. So that the fact that you, in your walks of life, consistently run into this person who's very frustrating.
Yeah.
And what do you do about that?
Yeah.
And what is the right way of engaging? And will I continue to engage? Right. Those are questions that, don't show up in the annals of history.
Yeah.
But make a real difference in terms of your own daily life.
Yeah, and your own moral growth. I think we all know people, or have known people, right, that you think, I'm going to avoid this person because they're so tedious, right? And Emma never avoided her, right? There were times where you think, well, maybe we won't stop by when we're walking by this time, but she would never make a spectacle. She'd never make excuses to get away. But she does get burned out on Miss Bates.
Yeah, and I guess you could see something similar in Knightley, and for that matter, Emma's attentiveness to her father.
Yeah, good.
He's also just a
difficult
character. He's boring.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Complaining about the weather all the time.
Yeah, and Emma has infinite patience for him. It's kind of surprising as a contrast, right? That she doesn't have quite that patience for Miss Bates, but she's not bothered by it. In fact, she thinks it's her calling in life to go into old age taking care of her father.
Right? Yeah, and Knightley is willing to to do the same.
Yeah.
Even before they get married,
Yeah.
that he has a real concern for how this person is doing. And yeah, that's something that I think it's easy to lose in our culture, which involves a kind of affluence, generally speaking, that allows people to be more segmented and
insulated
from each other. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Maybe
a great novel.
We'll get to chat about one of our other books sometime.
Yeah, good.
Thanks,
All right.
Chris.
Yeah, thanks, John.